Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are. Please welcome to DUB TV, the program we call The Dialogue. Today, we want to try to uh, give a detailed information of what had been transpiring in the Somali region. And so this program we are doing in English. The reason that we're doing this brief program in English is that because there's a lot of diplomats, a lot of community leaders, those who does not speak in Somali language, who have their curiosity piqued and they want to understand what's going on between Somaliland and Somali region, and we want to clarify it. And what better person than Mr. Goulet, who is one of the lead political analysts of the Horn of Africa, um, uh, as well as the founder of Dub TV. Mr. Goulet, welcome again.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We're doing a unique program in English. As Yasin said, see if we can shed some light to the non-Somali speakers on what's been happening and our analysis, particularly what's happening the last 3-4 days in the Somali region and the cross-border clashes. So I am, so do I.
Yeah, thank you, Gulet.
Yeah.
So let's just start exactly what's happening right now, what basically transpired yesterday, the cabinet meetings that the current administration held, and what message they are trying to send.
wasiirada jamhuuriyadda somalilan oo ah wadajir iyo waxqabad sumadiisa ugu horeyn waxaan tacsiin u dirayaa dadkeena ku dhintay deegaankii dacwaley waxaana looga barayaa inuu naxariisto jannadiina ka waraabiyo ehelkii axsaabtii iyo qaranka jamhuuriyadda somalilan samriga imaan ka siiyo waxaan kaloo ducaynayaa inta dhaawaca ah in alleh uga baryaynaa inuu caafimaad buuxa oo dhaxsaan siiyo meel fiican bay warayaan dadaaladii dhibaatada lagu soo afjarayey iyo wadahadalkii ka dhexeeyey jamhuuriyadda somalilan dowladda federaalka etoobiya iyo dowlad deegaanka soomaalida waxaana ku rajo weynahay in lasoo afjaro dhibaatadaas.
Goulet, what message is the president sending?
Right.
And he admitted directly the involvement of Somaliland.
Correct.
Negotiation that's taking place between Somaliland, the administration, the Somali regional administration, and the federal government. Your thoughts?
No, I think, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think the challenges that the new Somaliland government faces is on multiple levels. On the one hand, they're new, although the new president is somebody who's been around politics in the region for a long time, but they're a new government. And just as they were getting themselves set up, this incident happened. So it shows a level of disorganization in terms of governance, in terms of management. The other element of it is the holding a moment of silence for the people who died and so on. That's okay. I mean, that's acceptable. The final point that he made, though, is the point that sort of sticks out in that he said that there are talks currently ongoing and they are at a good place between the government of Somaliland, the federal government of Ethiopia, and the government of Somali Regional State. So I think that's where we need to pause for a moment. For the lack of protocol in terms of creating a level playing field in those different layers of government, and B, pretending or using the language that we see when conflict happens within sort of Somali, when the Khartoum and Somaliland, roughly more than a year ago. This was the kind of language. So it seems as if the immediate impression is that the government of Somaliland is in close proximity in terms of governance with the federal government of Ethiopia, and by default is functioning vis-a-vis the Somali regional state at an equal footing. So that gives a very new perception in terms of governance and where Somaliland is. Put it simply, he's putting Somaliland at par with Somali regional state. And
It's
that
another. It sounds like you're saying that they're acting like another administration that's
right.
part of Ethiopia, the way they're talking.
Right. So basically, what he's saying is we have direct dialogue with the Somali regional state, with the Ethiopia federal government being the intermediary, which is essentially what happens when the Afar region and the Somali region had clashes, or the Oromo region and the Somali region had clashes. So it almost seems like in the presentation of that speech that Somaliland is sort of in close proximity under the umbrella of the Ethiopian federal government.
Okay, then let's go to the other side. If Somaliland is an independent entity, that why would they be talking about what happens the AWALEY? Where is the AWALEY, Gulet? And what happened exactly? Why is Somaliland's business at all?
So I think this is the part where it becomes confusing, and I think those that are not Somali, obviously Somali regional state, Somaliland, people on both sides are Somali, and these cross-border, international border clashes for Somalis does not seem like such a big deal, but for the world and the non-Somalis, it's a very big deal. The AWALEY is in the northern part of the Somali regional state, very close to the borderline between Ethiopia and Somaliland. What happened was, and again, this happens with all Somalis essentially across the region when their resources are limited. In this case, the conflict originated from a clan-related dispute over grazing rights, over water and resources for livestock, and it grows. And I think this is something that we've seen happen many times in Somalia proper, not so much in Somaliland proper, but when you come into the Somali regional state, that's a region that is vast, that has vast grazing territory for livestock. And at the same time, the land is so big that it's almost difficult for someone to claim an empty land. So the conflict started out as a Somali conflict, a cultural conflict where land and resources become the issue. When that conflict happened, the Somali regional administration, based on all the information that we have now, this is the after-fact reports that we're getting, sent a team of 3 or 4 police officers, including the security chief for the Harshin region, which is sort of the regional head for this small place. His name is Mohammed Gedi. Conflict arose. The 3 police officers, or the 3 policemen from the Somali regional state that went to figure out what happened within this inter-clan conflict, came under fire.
The place that the AWALEY is part of Somali region. I will just want to clarify that.
Yes, the conflict is in Somali regional state. It is in Somali regional state control. It is within the borders. It is well far away from the borderline of Somaliland, to be confused, maybe being just over the line or not. So this is clearly a Somali regional state territory, which is why the police of the Somali regional state went there to ascertain and try to figure out a way to find peace. What had happened at that point is the police officers that went there initially came under fire. Essentially, the people who were firing assumed that they were part of sort of the side that they were going against. And I'll be a little crass, and I'll break it down in terms of tribe, and I'll sort of do it above. Essentially, it is Isaac and Ogaden, and we'll leave the sub-clans alone. But essentially, that is what happened. Then at that point, it escalated rather quickly, and it became a very deadly situation where then force was used. Now, the strange thing that happened, and I'll go back to your initial question, by all reports, the militia or the armed militia that was fighting on behalf of the people who are in the north, essentially pushing down from Somaliland, the Isaac, those were well armed, well organized, and well trained. And in the initial fight, they proved themselves worthy of trained fighters with heavy machine guns and some even had anti-aircraft based on the reports that we got. Now, then at that point, the situation gets murky in terms of the play-by-play of what happened point after point. But the net result was that the militia under the Somali regional state then rebuffed them and pushed them back. So the idea, and I want to go back to that very first statement of the president of Somaliland saying that giving the hint that it is Ethiopian sort of the Ethiopian federal military that did this. In effect, the fight ended up becoming between the Somali regional state militia, or Liu police, as they're known, and this well-trained militia wearing civilian clothes, but all suspicions were that they were a trained military force coming from Somaliland. So those are the two that clashed. Those are the two that caused much of the death and destruction. It is after the fact that then Ethiopia federal government is sending fact finding. So I think also the way the narrative has been put out the first few days, there were missing pieces in terms of who's actually fighting. At the end of the day, the people fighting were ethnic Somalis, and that's where the confusion. Then people in social media can add more information to it, but that's essentially the basic information.
Okay, so the Somali Regional Administration, Liu Police, was trying to figure out how to create a peace between two ethnic groups. And then militia came and killed the Liu police. And after that, all hell went broke.
Yeah, I think what we should not do, because we want people who are not Somali that are listening to this that are concerned by this, is let's not assign intent. I think the facts are there was interclan sort of dispute over grazing areas. Somali regional state, which this city or this town is within Somali regional state, well beyond the border, sent police. Police went there for whatever the reason. They were fired upon. I think the commander died, and another one was wounded, and the third may have died afterwards. So then it escalated rather quickly. So I think that's what happened in terms of play-by-play. In terms of intent, assigning intent is difficult, but the level of organization by the, and I'm going to use the tribal again, by the Isaac side was well organized. That initially they were using well-trained, well-organized, and heavily armed militia. And so that's what elevated the response from the Somali regional state. And then that's where there's a talk of, elders who are trying to create peace were sort of taken to Chichiga by force. They then spoke and said they were not taken by force. They're trying to. So all this murky stuff aside, this thing was a normal thing that happens within the Somali world, which is grazing and resources. But then the level of escalation where the ISAF militia proved to be well armed and well trained, which then resulted in the escalation of the fighting.
And then here's the thing, that Somaliland administration, whether it is the member of parliament, the cabinet ministers, the activists, their media, everybody start blaming and getting involved in this issue. Why would they do that? And what are they gaining about it? And why at the same time, Somaliland, who we always heard that keep complaining about Somalia, complaining about Djibouti and others, saying that do not interfere the territorial integrity of our nation. Why would they interfere territorial integrity of the Somali region and Ethiopia? Not only that, why will their armed militia cross the border? What is the narrative? What are they trying to achieve out of this?
I think it's a very good question. I think that is still will take some time to resolve in terms of what the end goal was. It's hard to imagine, if we just simply take a step back, it's very difficult to imagine that the new president of Somaliland would knowingly essentially have this undercover militia, undercover well-armed militia, do this sort of a thing. This seems to be something that may have been organized before him because of the level of organization. Because for him, it's a very difficult position to be in, having just been sworn in, having just created his government, to have to deal with this issue. Because remember, it's the biggest sales pitch for Somaliland is that they are a stable government. And this sort of a thing implies the opposite. So number one, it's very difficult to imagine that coming in, having won an election, he's been at this for a very long time, that the first thing he would do is sort of do this under the cover attack. So I think that is something to be said, and we'll find out as time goes how these were organized. The prevailing sort of theory at the moment is that these militia were essentially always ready to go, waiting for an opportunity. The opportunity is always going to arise when there are resources that are limited, where two tribes are living on top of each other. And again, the two sub-tribes clans that we're discussing have intermarried. You know, they have they're so mixed together that everybody else is further away from them. So I think that the second piece of it is, the new president couldn't have been ready. It just doesn't make sense for him to do that logically. B, the level of organization indicates that these militia were ready to go. And C, the triggering event was the clashes on the grazing. So I think, so the real question is that triggering event, was that done on purpose? Were these militia waiting for an opportunity to do this? So I think all that will be clear down the road. But the real question is going to be, in terms of as they continue on this discussion, in terms of peace, in terms of documenting what had happened, is going to be, does this thing essentially end now, or does it become a tit for tat, and 6 months from now somebody else will say, well, that well is ours. So I think that is yet to be seen. And also what's yet to be seen is the new president of Somaliland, the type of politics he's going to use versus the previous one, Musa Bihi, who used a much more aggressive politics.
So from what I'm gathering right now, you're saying that the previous administration might be involved in this because the current administration couldn't have done this.
Yeah, it brought to mind, obviously, it's not elevated to that level, historical event in the U.S. where you had John Kennedy was a new president, but before he got there, the CIA had this plan prepared that they were going to attack Cuba and maybe kidnap or kill Castro. So Kennedy comes in, the wheels of motion have already gone, and it happened, and it was a complete failure. And Castro essentially wiped all the sort of invading forces from the U.S. And it was an embarrassment all the way around. And Kennedy, came on camera and said, "The buck stops with me. It's my fault. I take the full blame." But later on, when we look at history, he had no knowledge of these operations. He had no knowledge of when they began. He had no knowledge of when they're prepared. And they, in that situation, also used a triggering event of locals uprising as the reason. So I think, what we're discussing are governments. What we're discussing are major events. What we're discussing is Africa. We're discussing East Africa, where resources are limited. Guns are limited. Bullets are limited. The fuel for trucks are limited. Putting soldiers out there waiting to do something is very difficult in terms of cost. So this is something that had to have been prepared, because the triggering event of a grazing concern escalating this high indicates that there was something that was in the works. We don't know who prepared it. We don't know if it was Moussa Bihi or someone within that government or somebody who's a holdover. So in time, I'm sure we will find out, but it's very interesting.
Okay, so in the end, Guled, because what is the response from the current Somali regional administration? What are you expecting it? And in Somali, we will discuss about it. We have 2 programs that's going to be happening in back to back right now. Who we have a prominent guest that will be discussing in Somalia about this. So, what is the current government is doing? Why the regional administration, the federal government, we know that they brought a military to the borders, and what do you see? What are you forecasting?
I think it's difficult to forecast simply because this escalated in a non-linear way. It escalated, it just simply exploded at the level of interaction within social media. Also mimicked this rapid escalation from a small thing to something very, very big. And it could have become protracted and very, very difficult sort of issue to resolve. My expectation is, because of the very hard and strong response from the Somali regional state Chikchiga government, and then the backing of the Ethiopia federal sort of policy networks in Addis Ababa, with the public acknowledgement of the new Somaliland president, that there were many casualties and difficult. And then we've seen a lot of videos and pictures in social media. My expectation is that in the short run, there will be, because I think the damage is done in terms of accountability, in terms of who's going to lose what. I think the key is going to be somehow maintaining a peace of people who have intermarried for generations, but at the same time, it's going to be, is there a political line, a hard political line, a border that separates Somaliland from Somali regional state? Or are we discussing 2 Somali regions? Does that weaken the concept of Ethiopia managing this border? Because that's one thing. Does that strengthen the idea that Somali regional state is purely autonomous? Here they are dealing with an international crisis. Does it mean that Ethiopia then becomes heavy-handed and brings federal forces? Does it become essentially the political excuse to send Ethiopian federal military forces to the border? What does Somaliland do? We do know Somaliland had a difficult time over the Las Anod region for over a year now, and the depletion of resources. Can it afford to have essentially a 2-front difficult border? All these questions when asked in sort of backtrack and indicate that the easiest solution is going to be a face saving for everyone because the damage is done, and there's going to have to be some
Accountability.
propaganda, if you will. But there has to be a face saving is the only. Otherwise, you're pointing to everybody's weakness. You're pointing to Ethiopia's weakness, federal government, of not being able to protect the border. You're pointing to the weakness of the Somaliland, that they're not able to just push in. You're pointing to the weakness of Somali regional state, that they can be surprised like this. So when you do that, and this is Africa, you tend to get a heavy-handed response. So to avoid that heavy-handed sort of belligerent attitude with everyone against each other, the best way to go will be a face saving, and I think that's what they're going to do.
Okay, so the silence of the Somali administration, is it a strategy, and the bombastic of the Somaliland's administration, is it a strategy?
Well, absolutely. I think if you are sure of yourself, they're each having different strategies based on essentially the diplomatic assets they have. We know the militaristic or sort of the security assets, but right now it's all diplomatic. It's essentially who wins the narrative, and I think in that sense, both sides are playing to their strength. Somaliland, since its inception in '91, has used bombastic language, right? I mean, it has used. That is the strength of Somaliland diplomacy versus.
It's the crying wolf.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily a crying wolf, but it's to say that we will draw a red line somewhere. You know, that is the politics that's been developing for 30 years.
Okay.
The flip side in the Somali regional state, everything is essentially new. You know, Ethiopia went through a major transition in 2018. Somali regional state, Chichigas went through a major transition. That transition for the Somalis in Ethiopia is still ongoing. So the unique element that this event had created within the Somali regional state is a level of unity behind the president from all political sides, opposition. On the left guys, the intellectuals who were waiting for him, the security-minded folks, the elders. So I think it had a very interesting dynamic within Somali regional state in terms of getting some unity behind the president. In Somaliland, it's a little different. I think there are people, particularly the business community that we have contact with, have indicated that they want this to be done with because they want to have internal accountability. The last year and a half has been very difficult for Somaliland financially. And I think, you could see that that's the focus because the new president has one of his advisors is the former finance minister of Somalia. So I think you see the focus on so resources are very, very difficult. And I think we will know in the next 2-3 weeks, most likely, I'm guessing, Allahu A'lam, but we'll see.
All right. So we'll end here and we will dive in the other program on the other side in Somali. And I thank you, Gulet. Anyway, we did it together. No thanks, huh?
Thank you. Thank you. No thanks.